Welcome to the Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast, the show that creates a kinder world free of patriarchy by celebrating the brilliance of humans who are healing the patriarchy with love. Together, we focus on the positive to amplify it, birthing a brighter future for all. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's absolutely wonderful to be together with you again, and it's such an honor and a joy to be sharing today's episode with you all. I'm your host, Luna, and today we're joined by Shakti Sundari. Shakti is a priestess of love and sacred sexuality who has followed her bliss in teaching embodied awareness and awakening for the past 20 years. Trained as a yogi, tantrika, conscious dance facilitator and healer, Shakti is a passionate advocate of women's empowerment, a masterful curator of full-bodied spirituality, and an eternal student on the path of authentic living, with a gift for seeing deeply, channeling wisdom, and holding compassionate yet powerfully transformative space. Shakti has created and delivered an ever-evolving series of tantric and personal development courses, writes an inspiring blog, interviews leading lightworkers, and published her first book in 2021, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women. Wow. Hello, Shakti. Big warm welcome to the show, and thank you for being here with us.
Oh, hi, Luna. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I'm really grateful that you've agreed to come on, and I've been looking forward to our chat. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we were due to chat and I got sick, so we had to rearrange. And it's just happened to line up with the eclipse. So our energies are coming together for this episode on the eclipse. So that's when we're recording it for all those that are listening. So I've got so much I want to ask you. You're just like this well of wisdom. So I've got loads of things I want to ask you.
Fire away.
Oh, honestly, thank you so much. I think the first thing that I want to ask about is actually about Tantra, because I don't know much about it. It's not something I've ever looked into. I haven't been on any tantric workshops. And I think sometimes it gets misinterpreted. I think, you've got people that think about Sting saying he likes to have tantric sex, and maybe people have got a bit of weird ideas around it. So could you tell us the truth about it? And I'd also like, if maybe another question that's part of that is, what does it mean to be a tantrika? What does that look like? Maybe you can give some examples.
Okay. Right. Well, so first thing I want to say is, don't look to me to tell you the truth on anything. I can tell you my understanding, I can share my wisdom and my experiences, but the truth is something we each have to discover for ourselves. And that feels really important for me to say at the outset, because in my own journey, I have followed so many different paths and wisdoms and kind of wisdom keepers, but also people who might have previously been called gurus. And I can see that there always has been in myself and in others this quest for truth, this quest for knowledge, this quest for awakening and evolution. And I find it's really important never to give away our power and never to underestimate our own wisdom and our own knowledge along the path, if that makes sense. So just want to say that as a disclaimer first before I sort of share it anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, whatever I say, just hear it, feel it. What resonates, take it. What doesn't resonate, don't take it. And it's as simple as that. I won't be offended.
Okay.
So Tantra, the word itself originates from a Sanskrit word, which means actually to weave, or a web, a thread of learning, a thread of knowledge, weaving together. So that word itself doesn't mean anything at all to do with sex. And the teachings that the tantric path is drawn from go back through ancient times, through ancient history, and they're just one very wise, in my opinion, series of practices. It's not a religion. You don't have to believe anything. So it's a series of practices and an approach to living that is meditative and can empower you to discover the truth for yourself, to become self-realized, to recognize your oneness with all, your oneness with everything, and to see every aspect of life as sacred, every aspect of life as divine, and every experience of being human as offering you the potential to recognize your oneness with the infinite, your oneness with God, your oneness with source. So that's kind of a broad introduction as I understand it. There are many different paths in the tradition. Some are very sort of strict and disciplined, just like any form of practice or any form of values or principles. You know, it can be interpreted a million different ways. And the way that it's become associated with sex specifically in the West is that because these teachings are all encompassing and all embracing, the body and sexuality are embraced as divine and sacred and as part of what can take us to God. And in the West, you know, there's like a whole long tradition of the feminine, the body, the sexuality, the emotions, which are all kind of things associated with the feminine being shamed, being denied, being repressed, and being seen as very separate from God and being seen as very separate from divinity. And what's different and unique about the tantric path is that there's none of that repression, there's none of that pushing away, there's none of that disrespect or disregard for the body, the emotions, and the sexuality. All of this is seen as holy and sacred and as being part of the potential for us to awaken. So we can awaken through lovemaking in the physical, you know, with another, but ultimately, like for me, the understanding is that the teachings are about making love with life in all that it is. So you don't need a partner to have that experience. And also the energy that I call sexual energy or Kundalini energy, which is your life force, which we do experience as a stirring of energy and sensation in our loins, in our sexual organs. That itself is regarded as an energy that has the potential to awaken us spiritually if we become aware of how it can move through our bodies and expand through our bodies and expand our consciousness, rather than just acting it out at its most base level without any sort of consciousness or awareness around how we are embodying and using that energy. So that's kind of the answer to the first bit. I hope that's sort of helpful. Feel free to ask any clarifying questions.
Yeah, oh, it's that's really helpful. Thank you, and thank you for the disclaimer as well, because you're right. We are our own gurus, aren't we?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how do you make love with life?
Great question. And I know sometimes I say things now that seem really obvious to me. And when I used to hear them, they didn't make any sense to me. And it was a bit frustrating because I could see that somebody had this understanding that I didn't have. And I was like, what does that actually mean? What does that actually mean? So again, coming back to the simplest aspects of being in a human body. So let's start with breathing. And, you know, a lot of tantric practices will include paying attention to the breath as a meditation. These are all kind of the foundations for making love tantrically, will include being aware of your breath. and being aware of the sensations of breathing. So if we just take that as one example, if you begin to focus on the sensations of breathing that are happening in your body in this moment, tracing the current of breath as it enters your body, where does it go in your body? Follow the flow of that breath all the way in, all the way down. Feel your belly expanding. Feel your chest expanding. Like there's so much going on. And if you're able to really pay attention to that and focus all your awareness on that, the mind stops. There's no more thinking. You're fully present in the moment. And all there is awareness and breathing and sensation. And that's you being intimate with this very sacred, potent moment. And in that intimacy with what is happening right now, there's nothing else but that. And that can be then experienced because it's completely unfiltered by all the thought forms, all the assumptions, all the expectations, all the thinking that the mind does. As ecstatic, as blissful, as still, as orgasmic. And it's like a reminder or a connection with the infinity of being. So breath is something you do involuntary. You're not having to control anything or make anything. It's just happening. And that breath is coming and going and coming and going. There's a pulse, there's a rhythm. And everybody on this planet is breathing. All the trees are breathing. All of life is breathing. The breath that's coming in and going out connects us with all that is. So in that simple contemplation, what is making love? Making love is being fully intimate with what is. Being fully open to sense what is happening now. And there's no end to the depths to which you can sense and perceive and feel and open and connect with what is. So that's what I call making love with life. And I can, experience orgasmic waves of energy flowing through my body when I practice in that way, or when I just open myself. It can be through the breath, it can be through the eyes, just looking at a flower, looking at a tree, feeling the breeze on my cheek. Can be through an emotion that I'm feeling. It could be strong emotion or a gentle emotion, but if I just fully give my attention to that emotion in this moment, without mental stories, suddenly I'm intimate with that. There's no barrier between me and it, and I become one with it, because what is making love? It's communion, it's union, right? We become one with. So that communion can happen at any time with anything through bringing our awareness to it. And in the tantric way of thinking or interpreting that, it's like the union of the feminine and the masculine. So these are just concepts. You don't have to use these names. I use these names. If it doesn't resonate for you, it doesn't matter. So the masculine would be conceived of as the awareness, the presence, the consciousness. And the feminine would be conceived of as everything you can see, sense, touch, feel, hear, smell. And it's then the kind of holy communion of those two aspects of life of being. When they become one, we're unified. We're fully complete. There's no lack. There's nothing we need. There's nowhere we need to go, and all is perfect and all is well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually followed along when you were talking about breath, because I'm not usually that into breath. I'm a bit too cosmic. I'm a bit too up in the clouds. But I decided to follow along as you were talking. And what I noticed was love in my heart, a bit of turmoil in my solar plexus, which is normal for me. And that kind of ecstatic Kundalini energy in my base chakra, like you were speaking about earlier. And it's interesting because I don't normally notice those things, but just by watching my breath and following it, like you said, I actually came into, as you call it, like a communion with those things. So yeah, thank you for that. I get it a bit more now. I do understand that a bit more. And I'm guessing this also includes feelings that are maybe a bit more uncomfortable. You spoke a lot about nice feelings that we all might pursue or might prefer, but I guess it has to include everything. So if I woke up this morning and felt like shit, as long as I didn't push that away and was in a state of being an allowance with that, would that be tantric?
Yeah, that is a great part of the teaching and the practice, which is nothing is pushed away, nothing is rejected, nothing is sinful, nothing is shameful, nothing is bad, actually. And I know that can become a little bit complex when we look at what's going on in the world and some of the experiences that we or other people have had, that we instantly want to label right and wrong, good and bad, you know, in the world of duality. But if you take, for example, experiences that would be labeled painful, difficult, suffering, and these are the things that often people want to avoid and want to get away from. What I can say to you from my own experience is that if you only chase the light, you know, you will come right back around to the dark. It's inescapable. It's inescapable. And part of the tantric path is the embracing of all. And ultimately, there does come the recognition that it's both aspects are necessary and equal. And there can be the return to love and the return to wholeness through the embrace of, I mean, some of the tantric meditations, you know, are about standing on the edge of a cliff and looking down into the abyss, standing in or lying in a completely pitch black room and facing the fears that come up of the dark, meeting the most intense emotions as they arise, like fear, shock, horror, grief. So there's no judgment of any of these aspects of being human, but there is the invitation to meet them with the same level of awareness. And the word that you use, allowance and acceptance, and again, just with the same level of presence. It's like a meditative quality. And what the discovery can be in that is that if we meet what arises, if we're able to, and sometimes we do need help in that if something really intense is triggered for us, of course, that the intensity will diminish. If it's because basically I see presence or awareness as love. It's the same thing. It's this sense of I embrace what I'm experiencing. There's an embracing of it. There's a meeting of it. And as we meet and embrace whatever we're feeling, it begins to lessen its hold on us and become integrated. And that's part of the healing path that Tantra can also offer. Because we all have wounds, we all have traumas, you know, we all have triggers. And this is one way that I teach and that I myself embody as the path of healing from those things, which is to meet them with loving presence and awareness. Let them move through, because ultimately every emotion is energy. If you take it down to its source, to its first moment that emotion or that sensation arises in your body, it's energy. And it's the same life force energy that can be pleasurable at its, you know, at its source. You catch it right when it arises. And I've held space for myself and others where, you know, we've started off and I've been holding space for a client, and, you know, she's feeling all these really difficult emotions. And it can go from feeling those difficult emotions to being ecstatic in 10 to 15 minutes sometimes. with presence. And again, if you want to make it more tangible, think of making love. If you're heterosexual, which I am, so it's easier for me to think of it in these terms. Think of how you might long to be met in lovemaking. That longing to be seen, that longing to be felt, that longing to be completely met in your unfurling and your orgasmicness by a man who can be really right there with you in his presence. Ultimately, that's what you're doing for yourself with that kind of practice. And so your feminine feels met, and she blossoms open. We experience a return to a bliss, to wholeness.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think you're right, actually, because I know with my own self, if I'm not in a state of allowance, maybe I'm in judgment, or maybe I'm frightened of what I'm feeling. You know, if things are very intense, which they often are with me, then that can actually stop those feelings from going to the light and transforming.
Right.
It kind of creates almost like a grip on it, and it doesn't fully leave, or if it leaves, it kind of leaves, and there's I don't know, almost like the seed remains. So it's kind of like, for it all to be cleared and to be transformed, we have to allow the body to transmute. That's what I find with myself anyway.
Yeah.
And I love, sorry,
Right.
go on. Go
I
on,
was going to say
Shakti.
that that gripping that you mentioned, I recognize that from myself and others that I've been in space with, doing these practices. And also when there is trauma, that's a protective mechanism. That's the body is so wise, there's a wisdom to that protection mechanism that came in at a certain point to protect you. So that gripping can be connected to that very primitive desire to keep you safe, because perhaps what was originally experienced was so overwhelming, it could not be felt, and the psyche kind of creates this armor or layer of defense against feeling too much, because it can feel like it's going to overwhelm you so much, almost like you might die if it's too much, so what I would say to that is, it's really important to honor where you're at and never push anything, and simply in that attitude of allowing. So if you're feeling that gripping, if you're feeling that fear, rather than trying to push through it and think, I'm not whole, or I'm not awake until I've met all of this fear, or until I've, pushed through this gripping, it's more, I notice I feel fear. I notice there's this gripping, and I can be with that, and breathe with that. I can just rest in that space of being with that. My heart might be racing. There might be a tightness in my solar plexus, and I'm just being with it. I'm just being with it. I'm not pushing to get somewhere. Because I think we're so conditioned from the patriarchal system to be goal orientated, to think we have to get somewhere. And that's how a lot of people have sex or make love as well. It's like, we've got to get to orgasm as quickly as possible. And again, there's this correlation of like, if we take that goal oriented thinking out of the equation, and we're just present with what is actually wanting to happen, what is actually moving at the moment, where do you actually want to put your hand, where do you, it's like, rather than having this foregone conclusion of racing towards this destination, it's like, be present now, be present now, be present now, be present now, and accept and allow what is now, And again, that's how you drop into presence and ecstasy in every moment, rather than, it's like an orgasmicness rather than a one-off orgasm and done. Very different. And that's why Sting does talk about making love for a long time, because that is part of what can be possible when we change that whole kind of thrusting, goal-orientated way of making love on its head and just surrender to what's happening.
Yeah, I love that. There's a softening with that. It's actually tangible. I can actually feel it now as you've been speaking. A bit like a flower opening.
Yeah.
Don't want to use cliches, but it does feel like that.
Yeah.
I think you've mentioned. Sorry, Shakti, go on. I keep interrupting. I don't mean to.
I was just going to say that, that is the feminine, the yoni, which is the Sanskrit word for vulva and womb space. I always have that image of a flower when I think of the yoni and how she needs presence and safety to open. And the feminine needs presence and safety to open fully, to her greatest magnificence and pleasure potential.
How do we create that safety?
How do we create that safety?
Mm.
Yeah, so it is a really good question. When I did my first training, the facilitator of sexual awakening for women, we did a whole section on safety, because most women have experienced feelings of unsafety. Most women have experienced some form of words or touch they didn't want, like a crossing of their boundaries, their physical body boundaries. And a high proportion of women that I work with, usually a third, have experienced abuse. So safety comes up as a really important question. And it's too trite to say, well, you have to create safety for yourself within. That's too trite an answer. It is part of the answer. And part of that creating safety for yourself is doing the inner work of healing from any wounds or traumas you've experienced with the masculine or the feminine, where you have felt to be a victim, where something has been done to you that you did not want. So it's taking responsibility for that healing, and in doing that, you are changing the script. You are empowering yourself. So at a certain point, you may no longer identify with being a victim. So that is one part of creating safety, which is to know yourself, to heal yourself, to love yourself. And learning, education is also a part of that. So for example, we all have a different story. In my story, my father was emotionally and psychologically abusive, and that didn't feel safe growing up. My boundaries were overridden, more psychologically and emotionally than physically, mostly, but still there was a constant overriding of boundaries. So I didn't know what boundaries were. I didn't feel safe to say no to somebody, well, in most situations, but particularly to somebody in power, somebody with more authority, or most especially a man. If I got angry, I would repress my anger and turn it inwards or cry rather than be able to express my anger. Because if I dared to do that, I would be hit or shouted at or locked in my room or something. So that's my story, and I'm sure we all have variations on that theme. So part of my education, and this would be also another way of creating safety for ourselves, is to learn these things that we weren't taught, and that we might have embodied in a dysfunctional way because we didn't know any different. So I've had to educate myself about boundaries and consent to really understand what that means, and that I can say no, and that, you know, my body, my health, my well-being are all my responsibility. So that education then also comes back around to taking responsibility and stepping out of the victim. So creating safety through education, through healing, through self-love, self-nourishment, and really, again, because what also happens if we've experienced any kind of abuse, trauma, overriding of our boundaries, is that we feel unsafe in our bodies. So part of it is also very much doing whatever you need to do to begin to feel at home and in love with your physical body, every part of your body, to reawaken the sensation that would have shut down, to heal any shame around your breasts, your vulva, any part of your body. And then what happens is, once you are able to feel again, your feeling sense is your guide. What am I feeling in this moment? Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? Does my body want this? Does my body not want that? Right? So you have to have that level of attunement to yourself to know what your no is and to know what your yes is. And we can then go beyond that, even to beyond your physical body, to your energy body. So, you know, I can sense, I'm sure you can too, somebody who's maybe 6 feet away. I can already feel their energy in my field. What do I notice? Do I want to go closer? Do I want to go further? I take responsibility for that. So it's not about, oh, they've got horrible energy and they're putting it on me. It's like, oh, I notice some discomfort in my body. I need to move. Right? So that empowerment piece is really important part of your way to create safety for yourself. And it's a relearning, and it's a rewiring. And it takes time. Yeah, and that's enough on that bit for now. Have you got any more questions about that?
Oh, yes, I've got quite a few around consent and boundaries, just because I think it is something that's missing for so many people. And in particular, I wanted to ask you if you would speak about consent, because I think it gets so confused, and particularly when someone's in a relationship, I think they think, you know, one time consent to sex means every time.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it can even be broken down, really, consent into, can I touch you here like this for this length of time? Rather than just being, let's have sex. So could you maybe just talk a bit about what true consent is, and kind of a really mature way of approaching consent? Because I think it's missing from most people's awareness.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll do my very best, because I agree it's really important. So, and I also want to give credit here, because some of what I'm going to say will be informed by a beautiful body of work created by a lady called Dr. Betty Martin, and she has created a thing called the Wheel of Consent.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who wants to know more, look it up. She's an amazing person, and I've trained in that system, and it's incredible, and it's really helped me. So think of your body, your emotions, your health, your energy body, your sexuality. Think of all of that as your domain, and that is yours, like your island. Say, imagine yourself on your island, and your boundaries go around that. Your boundaries are the outer edges of that island of you. So you have a right to do whatever you want with you. That's your right. And you have a responsibility at the same time. So what happens to you is also your responsibility. Now, I'm not saying you're responsible if somebody rapes you. I'm not saying that at all. But there comes responsibility with having that domain. And I think that's a bit that also often gets missed when we slip into victim mentality. I know that I used to. Okay, so then what somebody does to you or for you, is by your consent. And you also have limits. You have boundaries and you have limits, and they can change. They can change from moment to moment. They can change from day to day. They can change from person to person. They're not fixed. You may have some boundaries that you think are really fixed, and then in a certain situation with a certain person, those boundaries and limits might change. So a boundary, could be, I never drink alcohol, for example. Or it could be, a limit could be, I only drink 1 glass of wine a night. Just trying to give sort of practical examples. So then consent comes in the requesting, which is completely not the norm, I think, out there in the world. Mm-hmm. It certainly wasn't my norm growing up as a teenager, having sort of fumbling sexual experiences. I didn't even know what that sort of word consent meant, and in terms of parents to children as well, and people in authority like teachers as well. So consent, may I touch your forearm? And then the person who's being asked feels into that, and I notice their embodied response. They give themselves time to feel into it, and then they give an honest and clear answer. Yes, you may touch my forearm for 5 minutes. That's my limit, right? Or no, you may not touch my forearm. No excuse needed, no explanation needed, just no. Or no, you may not touch my forearm, but you may put your hand on my shoulder. You can give options like that. And ways, as a beautiful game that Betty Martin created as a simple way to guide us into exploring this, called the 3-minute game, where you get to ask for what you want, and you get to make a request. Will you stroke my leg for 3 minutes, please? Feel into it. Yes, I can do that. I can do that with a generous, full heart. I can stroke your leg for 3 minutes. How would you like me to touch your leg? How would you like me to stroke your leg? And then you can be really precise. I'd like you to do it slowly, firmly, gently, quickly. You get really specific. And if at any point in those 3 minutes, your body goes into some kind of, that's my limit, you state it. Stop. and the person who's giving, or actually they can also be receiving by giving, stops at your request. And that is respected. And imagine how different life would be. Imagine how different lovemaking would be. Imagine how different all our relationships would be if we apply these kinds of principles. So it's not just about sex, it's about everything. You know, have you ever had a friend? I'm just thinking of another completely different example where I guess because I'm quite an open person and comfortable in and a good listener, comfortable in that role, and I'm a good listener. Quite often when people meet me, they will very quickly go into talking at length and or offloading. And that can feel overwhelming to me. So perhaps in that kind of situation, a question about consent could be, is it okay if I share with you right now? Do you have capacity to listen right now? Could you hear me out for 5 minutes, please? And then you can feel into, do you have capacity for that? And say yes or no. Now, what I've noticed through, because I actually run a workshop called Just Say No, which teaches women about boundaries and consent, is that for a lot of women, it's the saying no that they find difficult. Oh, I'm going to be a bad person if I say no. What about them? I'm going to hurt their feelings if I say no. And those are the kinds of things that get in the way of honest communication, and holding those boundaries is a kind of a trained codependency or a trained over concern for the other at the expense of the self. And that's part of what I would see as you know, some of the conditioning that patriarchy has, you know, some of the imprints of patriarchy for women that we're clearing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I actually do ask my friends if it's okay if I speak to them about whatever it is. And especially if it's something that I think could be triggering. I always say, I would like to speak to you about this, but it might be triggering. And I think it's really important that we do that. And as you say, it's part of dismantling patriarchy for women to actually move into this boundary self. I just want to ask you, because you know my history, and most of my listeners know that I've had an awful lot of rape, and I've had decades of abuse where I wasn't allowed to have a boundary, or similar to what you described, Shakti, with your dad. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. But when you try to have a boundary and it's been so violently breached, and that was all I knew for decades. So like the other women that you're describing, I am utterly terrified when I need to say no, to the point where sometimes I'm kind of prepping because I can sense where somebody's going, and I know I need to say no, but I just freeze. So what kind of advice and tips would you have for those of us that have had those severe breachings of boundaries, but are wanting to now have stronger boundaries and kind of repair that and do the healing? Have you got any tips for what we can do if we come into those moments and we kind of freeze, and then we haven't said it and it's too late and it kind of escalates? That does happen with me sometimes, and I'm sure with others. So do you have any tips around how we can get better at that?
Oh gosh, so first thing I want to say is, just as you ask that question and share, and you know, I then touch into again what you've experienced and what probably many of your listeners have experienced. First thing I just want to respond with is my compassion. Yeah, so much love and compassion. And I guess from that is an invitation, a reminder to, as much as you can, cultivate that compassion for this part of yourself that is terrified, that is afraid, with good reason. Yeah. So love and have compassion for the terrified part of you. And the freeze response, as I'm sure you and your listeners also know, is a classic and typical trauma response. Nothing wrong with you. It's, it's what the body did to survive. And then, perhaps in slightly more practical terms, things like tell your trusted friends that you're going to be experimenting with saying no and boundaries and consent, and it might come out a bit weird sometimes or a bit crunchy, and you don't want to cause offense, but you could let trusted people know that this is what you're learning, this is your area of growth, and you might do it with them sometimes as a growth point. And you can also safely practice this with friends or on a course where you get to verbalize it and have the experience of saying no in a safe way, in a practice context. So again, that's part of what I did in the Wheel of Consent training. So I wasn't in a real life situation with somebody, but we all got to practice saying no over and over again, and asking for what we need and giving our consent and requesting consent. So you can practice it out of the bounds of your real life. So even that can bring up fear, just practicing it with somebody in a workshop type context. So you're just beginning to train and flex that muscle in safe ways. And then you can be discerning about where you may then begin to practice it in real life, knowing that you're choosing to exercise discretion, to saying no to people that you know aren't going to turn around and be violent to you in response to your no. And just doing it once, even in practice and then in real life, will be scary and exhilarating, and it will grow the capacity. So it is a case of practice safely. And what you also have to be ready for is that most people in the world are not going to get violent and abusive when you say no. However, not everyone is going to like you saying no. So what comes with this territory is it's kind of a deeper cultivation of self-love again, because you have to get used to, I have to say no to honor myself and be true to myself and develop my boundaries, and not everyone's going to like it. And that's okay, because I'd rather be true to myself than betray myself. And not everyone has to like me. And I know that goes hand in hand often with this trauma wound, because part of that trauma wound can be the need to be loved. So we think by saying yes to everything or giving our consent, even if unconsciously, to everything, that keeps us safe and it keeps us loved. But that's not really love. It's fear. And true love is honoring your needs, your boundaries, your rights, your no. Saying no is not unloving. Saying no can be the most loving thing you do for yourself and another. I hope that was helpful.
It is. Thank you. And I'm definitely going to try that. So thank you so much, because I'm sure it'll be very helpful and handy for some of the listeners as well. So thank you for giving that. I wish this was taught in schools.
Me too. Me too. Yeah.
Petition to have Shakti in every school.
Oh, honestly, yeah. When I speak to my daughter, so like I have a legacy in my children. I've got a 21-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter, and so I've had the gift of teaching them these different ways. And honestly, you can really see the difference in how they're now showing up as young adults in the world, the way they're navigating the early stages of relationship and sexuality, and they do stand out amongst their peers, as being quite unusual, because their peers do not have these skills. And, that makes me sad, but it also, highlights the need and the potential that is there.
Well done to you and to them as well, because it's a brave thing to do when your peers aren't behaving like that.
Yeah.
I sort of want to touch on, do you know anything about sex education in school? Because mine was bloody awful and it was very patriarchal. I remember they taught the boys all about masturbation and essentially about orgasm and pleasure. And they taught the girls that it would be painful. You can expect to bleed, which is a terrible thing, actually, to be teaching children. And about contraception, abortion, STDs. So that was all kind of placed on the girls. And then the boys had all this about pleasure. And I don't know if it's changed that much. I don't know what's being taught in schools at the moment. But I just think that when I think back to the foundation that was kind of given in our school, it was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's changed.
It's another area I'm very passionate about. I feel a little bit, even myself, kind of helpless to address in the face of the kind of institution of education. I did try approaching my children's school to go in and offer some teaching and guidance, but they didn't even answer my email, actually. So I know that sex education is now a requirement, and I've heard what my kids have to say to me about what they received not that long ago, and it was appalling, and it was very fear-based, very limited to like STDs, not getting pregnant. There was no mention of pleasure. There was no couching it in the context of relating, which is ridiculous to me, because whether you're having a one-night stand or whether you're entering into a relationship with somebody, every time you have some form of sexual interaction, it is relational. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. So the other person's feelings, your feelings, your well-being are part of that interaction, however short or long it is, and that's not taught. Boundaries and consent, again, not taught. So yeah, to me, it's just a repetition of the divisive, fear-based thought forms of patriarchy, actually, because it doesn't set out sex and sexuality to be something that is without shame, something that is profoundly pleasurable, something that can manifest deeper love in the world, something that can really create beautiful bonds of connection and intimacy with others, and something that can be a spiritual experience. So all of this is denied, and the kind of old programming of shame, separation, lack of true intimacy is perpetuated in our young people. And of course, that the other thing that is endemic at the moment, and I don't have the stats to hand, is pornography. Like most young people get their sex education from pornography now.
Yep.
And that, again, perpetuates a lack of true intimacy, a lack of understanding of the differences in arousal pathways between men and women, you know, and then boys and young men try to make love or have sex in the way that that's portrayed. And it's really not going to be satisfying or connecting at all for most women. And from what I hear, girls are then doing things to please boys that they don't really want to do, just to be liked, just to be popular, to get validation, you know. And everything that I do in my work is to undo this programming. But sadly, I see it still being perpetuated through the institution of our education system. Yeah, and so that's not ideal. I'd love to go in, and I just don't know if they would welcome somebody in who talks so openly and without shame as I do about these things, and as I have done to my own children, so that they have no shame around their bodies, they have no shame around feeling pleasure, you know, they have no shame about owning their desire, and they have boundaries, and they're not just using sexuality to validate themselves or replay these stereotypes that we see in the media.
That's really healthy, thank you. Yeah, God, I wish you could go in. I wish you could go in. Honestly, I really want to start a petition. I do. I'm glad you mentioned pornography. Do you know, some years ago, I read this terrible article, and I'm sorry because I don't remember where I read it, but it stuck with me because it was so horrific. And it was about, in Australia, porn is that prolific that doctors are seeing, and I really mean the majority of 12-year-old girls with internal injuries because of the way that sex was being enacted upon them. And these girls, as you said, hadn't really wanted, you know, I'm talking about anal sex. They hadn't wanted to have anal sex, but had been coerced into it because of porn, because boys are watching porn, and that's how they therefore want to have, you know, I use the term loosely, sex. And it's an attack on the feminine when it's like that. And these children have got long-term injuries, and will have for the rest of their lives because of it. It's so important that we do something about this. It really means a lot to me. And I support a charity that's called Fight the New Drug. And they're doing a lot about education and how it's in schools, and majority of children by the age of 13 have watched all kinds of pornography. And they've also got, you know, ex-porn actresses coming out and whistleblowing about the industry and how it's really just rape. And of course, we also know that the majority of people within the porn industry are actually sex trafficked. So they've been kidnapped, taken away from home and forced into the industry. So it's an industry that, if it stays, needs to drastically transform. And so I'm just so glad that you mentioned it, so that I could just mention that for people as well. But there's a really good, if you want information, a really good charity is called Fight the New Drug. And they're on social media and things, so people can go and look that up if they want to. So shall we talk about sacred sexuality, kind of the other end of the scale? And perhaps you could talk to us about what that means, what kind of experience that is. I've never experienced it, so you can kind of just share all about it. I'm really interested to hear.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning that charity. I hadn't heard of it. And it is really important. So when you talk about that and mention that, you know, I feel such a kind of like a clenching in my heart and such a sadness and a grief for the misguided way in which innocent developing young people are I mean, it's a form of abuse, really, because they're not old enough to say no, and they're not old enough to understand the implications. It's a greed-based manipulation and kind of in what's the word I want to use, programming for the reproduction of suffering ultimately, and disconnect in between people. So yeah, sacred sexuality is at the opposite end of the spectrum. And what I really want to impart is that when I use that phrase, sacred sexuality, what I feel most when I say it isn't my genitals, it's my heart. So sacred sexuality is about love. And again, as soon as I say that and I sort of switch the flip from what we were just talking about to love, I can feel that in my heart, I can feel that in my body. And I understand that combining those two words, sacred and sexual, is a stretch still for so many people. But I'm just going to kind of put it out there that that is because of the programming of patriarchy. Because when people, women and men, connect to their bodies and to their sexuality with love, with honor, as sacred, understanding that it is a route to spiritual awakening, then what happens is they're very empowered. They're sovereign. They can no longer be controlled by the church, by the government, by the institutions, by the teachings of sin and shame. Can't happen. So a sexually awakened person is a powerful person, sovereign person. What is sacred sexuality? So this is when it can be a man or a woman, can be, to me, like, I have no judgment of anybody's sexual expression. So you choose who you want to partner with, you choose who you want to make love with. You don't need to be heterosexual, you don't need to be a man and a woman. But the foundations for this are to love, embrace, and fully inhabit your body. Right back to what I was saying at the beginning in terms of feeling the sensations in your body. Having no shame around any body part. Understanding your sexuality is completely innocent. Completely innocent. How did you get here? You got here because somebody made love. And at a more profound level, it can also include the cultivation of an awareness of your energy body. So my experience and learning and understanding is that within and around our physical body, we have an energy body, we have chakras or energy portals within and around the physical body. And the inclusion of every part of me. So the highest part of me, like if we go through the physical body, at the top of my body, at the crown chakra, in a kind of esoteric way, I can connect to divine wisdom, I can connect to pure consciousness, I can connect to divine light. So that is a part of my being. We go down all the way through the body, through all the different layers of consciousness, awareness, love, expression, power, emotions, woundings, traumas, right down to the root chakra, to the base of the body, to my anus, right? to my feet, to the ground, to my most earthy humanity. And I honor and value above and below as equal. So my crown chakra and my anus are equally holy, right? My sexual center, my yoni, my vulva, equally holy. When I can truly know that and embody that and meet another in presence, in an attitude of honoring, an attitude of devotion, in an attitude of loving, not to get a result, not to make them have an experience, not to see how many different positions I can get my body into, not to see how many orgasms I can have or give, but honoring, bowing down with love, with devotion, then that's an expression of sacred sexuality, and all is welcome within that. So I also want to make clear, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is sweet, soft, and gentle. If we let go of all thoughts about how things should be that are part of our conditioning, and we allow our energy, our sexual energy, to just move and do what it wants to, then our expression can change in any moment. It can be wild, it can be raw, it can be loud, it can be quiet, it can be energetic, it can be gentle, it can be anything. So now I'm talking about the movement of Shakti. So the first part of my name, Shakti, in Sanskrit means divine feminine, and it also means power, and it also means life force energy. So when that life force energy moves without any inhibition, and the inhibitions only come from thinking, and they only come from shame, and they only come from our conditioning, it's free to express itself however it wishes, because there's no wrongness about it. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of simple enough. And yet the most difficult thing for us humans to really experience, because of all the blocks and barriers that are in the way in terms of our conditioning and our thinking, so and at the same time, if we let all of that go, I can tell you that personally, one of the most profound experiences I've had of what I would call sacred sexuality or sacred lovemaking. My partner, my lover at the time, had no training whatsoever in any tantric principles. He did meditate fairly regularly, but other than that, he wasn't pursuing a spiritual path of any kind. What made that experience tantric was that he approached me with utter love and devotion, and that was enough to shift the way in which we connected and made love into otherworldly realms, where truly the sense of I and you was lost, and there was simply like a not knowing of who was who and what was what. There was a sense of complete dissolution into a oneness of ecstasy. And it came down to love. And yeah, even when I say that, I kind of want to add an addendum onto that, because so often what we call love in the Western world is actually self-seeking. There's a difference between a love or a bulimia, like a infatuation or lust, or trying to get your needs met, and just an unconditional offering, an outpouring of devotion. And it doesn't necessarily happen every time. Sometimes we are not present. Sometimes we fart. Sometimes we're not in the mood. We're human. So I don't want to paint this picture that every experience is like that.
I feel sad because I've never had anything even close to that. And where I'm at currently with my own healing, it's a way off. Basically, I know it's a way off, if it's even achievable at this stage. I'm not even sure. But yeah, it's something that I long for. It's interesting as well, because you mentioned there about love. And I think, the media portrays both sex and love in pretty abusive ways. Like, have you noticed, like, I'm romantic, so I do like to watch some trashy stuff that's kind of meant to be romance, but I often don't find it that romantic, because there's things like, really the person is stalking the woman, but it's dressed up as if it's romance. And then you've got things like 50 Shades of Grey, which I haven't seen, but I know the premise of it. And when it came out, the office I worked in, every single woman was reading it. So they were all talking about it. And I was like, even back then when I was being abused and didn't realize, I knew that those books, that story was abuse.
Mm.
What can we do about this? Because it's been fed into everyone as if these things are normal. And for example, a man not taking no is because he loves you so much. He's just passionate about you, and
Right.
he knows what's best for the both of you, and it's that you are together. And it's all kinds of crap on the TV and in film, and even in magazines and celebrities as well. Their lives are often at least codependent, sometimes dysfunctional or abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what everybody's been fed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got anything to say about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one other thing I just want to add about what I was just talking about before. So when I was talking about sacred sexuality and sacred lovemaking, one thing I didn't make clear, and I want to make really clear, is you do not need a partner to have this experience. And actually, if you're single and solo, this is the best time to do the healing and to prime your body to open to this kind of possibility and experience. You don't need a partner, you don't need a lover. You begin by doing your own sexual healing and exploring what it is to touch yourself with devotion and love. Okay, so that's one other thing I just want to add about that other point. And everything is possible, Luna. So don't write yourself off. anyone who's listening, honestly, everything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then, right, so the programming, the conditioning that's out there in the media, in social media, in celebrity culture, a lot of it is just reproducing the programs that are disempowering and reproduce the patriarchal framework, for sure, and show us toxic as normal, or toxic almost as, or dramatic as something that's desirable. And 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, my God, I did buy the book, and not because I basically, I told myself, look, if everyone else is reading this, I need to know what they're reading and why it's so popular. So I bought it, and I almost threw it across the room, because it's so badly written. I couldn't believe anyone would read it. It's like, oh my God, this is awful. But then I did get a bit hooked in, and I did finish reading it. And I went to see the film for research purposes. And I was like, okay, so let me understand why this is so popular. Why is it, like, literally everyone on the tube was reading it on the way to work, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I have a theory, and it's just a theory. And part of that is that, okay, so in my understanding, true feminine sexuality, right, is wild, awesomely powerful, and infinite and insatiable. So the true nature of feminine sexuality is limitless. So we've been fed a lie that it's men who are hornier than women, men who want sex all the time, and women just go along with it. So that's one of the patriarchal myths. A woman in touch with her true sexual nature is infinitely orgasmic, infinitely. Most women who are still living under the sort of conditioning don't know that and don't have access to that. And they're having shit sex a lot, or no sex at all. But they long for that insatiable aspect of their sexuality to be recognized or to be awakened. And they don't feel they have permission for that because there's so much shame around being a sexual woman. Like, although we see it portrayed in the media as like, oh, you know, desirable, it's also shameful at the same time. You know, you can't win because you're either a slut, a whore, you know, or you're undesirable. So women, you know, have had to live under this toxic shame and judgment for centuries. So what this book did was it gave them permission to acknowledge that insatiable sexual appetite and almost the whole archetype in a way, without being responsible. And of course, it fed into the codependent narrative of if I love him enough, I will heal him and he will love me back, which is a big load of bullshit. It's toxic, codependent nonsense. If somebody's abusing you, dominating, controlling you, and you think you can love them better, that's rubbish. And that was the premise of that story as well, in a way, from what I remember anyway. You know, if only I love him, you know, he'll come around to me eventually. You know, I might not like this, but if I love him enough, you know, he'll kind of heal and stop doing all these things, and he'll love me, and we'll get married and live happily ever after and be rich, right? It's a fairy story, it's a fantasy, and it's disempowering. To claim your power as a woman, to claim your birthright as a woman, to claim your sexuality as sovereign, you step out of all of that bullshit. And you're like, this is my body, this is my pleasure, this is my power. I choose to share it with whom I choose to share it with, when I choose to share it. I get to pick you, I get to choose you, I get to open when I want, I get to close when I want. My pleasure is mine. I don't need you to give me pleasure. I already own my pleasure. I already know what pleasure is for myself. I give myself pleasure. Right? It's kind of the opposite to that. I'm not here to please you. I'm not here to look good for you. I'm not here to tantalize you. I don't need your validation. I don't need your validation. And I use my sexuality for highest good. I use my sexuality to awaken. I use my sexuality to create beauty in the world, create love in the world, create joy in the world, not to perpetuate division, not to perpetuate conflict, not to perpetuate control, power over dynamics, but I use my body, my sexuality to create love, to make love, to bring peace to the world, to bring joy and beauty to the world. and know that when you make that choice, it's not all easy. You know, it's not necessarily a straightforward, easy path.
Yeah, I always know that even the things we don't like serve the universe in some way. And I'm glad that you spoke about that, about what was happening really for women at that time, because within my office, the sexual awakening within the women was palpable. And honestly, men were a little bit scared, the men in the office. So that's interesting, isn't it? You were talking about the power of the feminine in this raw sexual energy. And
yes, it can be intimidating to a man who has not matured into his fullness as a, you know, as a man. You know, a younger woman, a less sexually empowered woman, is less threatening, less daunting, more malleable. And in the face of that true raw power of the feminine and her sexuality, you know, like, it can make a man feel inadequate or not good enough. But, you know, from my perspective, that's kind of at the root of why the feminine has been suppressed for so long, is fear.
yeah, I agree. And the feminine is the realm of the heart, and therefore the unknown. And the unknown is scary to the mind anyway. Depending on where you're at on your path, of course. But for a lot of people, the unknown and that kind of mystery and the wildness that is our true nature can be a terrifying space.
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm just thinking about, as you say that, I just come back from a journey through the south of France on a pilgrimage. Along the way, Mary Magdalene is believed to have lived and traveled there. And towards the end of our trip, we went to what's called the Yoni Cave. And it's this natural cave on the side of a mountain. Takes about an hour to get there. Well, actually a couple of hours to get there, all in all. And so we hiked to this Yoni Cave, and it looks like a vulva, the outside of it, literally with layers of lips and a crevice in the middle. And you can go inside the Yoni Cave. So I went first, and it was completely pitch black inside and on a slope. And yeah, it was very symbolic. As I went in the gates of the Yoni and into the darkness, I was scared. I've got to be honest with you, I felt fear. And so one of my sisters who was with me was asking me, like, what are you afraid of? And I said, I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of the unknown. I'm afraid of like the monsters, because it's like I had these childhood memories of like being scared of the dark and monsters under the bed, you know, things that might jump out at you. So that was like my mind, because of course there's nothing in, I mean, well, there's energy there, but the mind was playing those tricks. But it was a very symbolic moment to enter into the Yoni Cave and go down into the depths of the metaphorical womb space, the deep darkness down inside. So I did go in, and 3 of us went in together, and then we spent some time in there in the darkness. And eventually my fear faded, and then, you know, the experience changed. But it's that metaphorical representation of the feminine in nature is, for me, kind of aligned with my perception of the divine feminine, as aligned with, yeah, like you said, the mystery of the unknown, and the utter darkness, the utter nothingness that's kind of like before creation in this sort of cosmic womb.
Pilgrimage sounds immense.
Mm.
You know, you said you're going to write about that on your Facebook page in your group.
Yeah, looking forward to sharing some more, and just kind of, yeah, wanting to kind of get some of those experiences down in words before they kind of leave me, but also feeling like there's transmissions of wisdom that want to come through.
Oh, well, I can't wait for those. I'm excited. So we've been talking for nearly an hour and a half. So I just want to check where you're at, whether you feel ready to end our episode, or if you've got anything else that you want to talk about. I'm okay, but I'm just checking where you're at.
I'm noticing that I'm getting hungry, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I can feel my attention is just beginning to wane because my tummy's rumbling a bit now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you want to say before we kind of finish off, and I let you share with people where they can find you and work with you and things like that?
I just want to say thank you to you, actually, for your patience, for your capacity to listen, for your questions, and for the sincerity and love and care and devotion with which you're bringing forth this podcast. I really honor what you're doing and wish for your work to continue to expand and reach all the women and men out there for whom it's intended, and who it can really help to uplift, heal, and inspire.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me, because not everybody gets the healing the patriarchy with love. You know, some people think it means letting people off the hook. And it doesn't mean that, of course, because as you were talking about earlier with tantra, and it incorporates being angry and everything else, you know, because it's love. So it allows all. So that's why it's healing the patriarchy with love. So thank you so much for getting it, and being able to understand the new frequency that I'm bringing through with it. And I want to say, you're epic. I think you're just one goddess of a woman. And I am so grateful to have you in my life in the capacity that you're in my life, and that you're in the world being how you're being. And I know it can't have been easy to become who you are today and how you are. And I'm so grateful that you have done that for yourself, and of course the ripple effect that that has on the planet. And I hope everybody can see what I can see in you and the work that you do, which I really honor. And I greatly respect and admire you and what you're doing. So I would like everybody to show you some love and support. So can you let them know where they can find you if they're not already following you?
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. Okay. So I am on most of the social media forums. I am on Facebook. So you'll find my Facebook page. I think if you just put in Shakti Sundari, it will come up, but the URL I think is Ecstatic Awakening. And I have a Facebook group which is just for women called Living Shakti Awake. I have a website which is shaktisundari.com. I'm on Instagram at Shakti Sundari. And those are the main ways you can reach me. Yeah.
Okay. And I mentioned earlier at the start that you have a book out as well that's called, let me just get this, I've got my notes, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women. So I will put links to your social media, and if you could provide me with a link to your book, I'll put that as well in the show notes and on my social media, which is all at Luna Louisanna, if anybody wants to follow me. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. So thank you.
I forgot to say I'm on YouTube as well. Forgot that one.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it all in the so anybody that wants to find Shakti, you can go on the show notes and you'll be able to just click on and very quickly get to it, or look up Shakti Sundari, like she says. So thank you so much. You've been absolutely amazing guest, and I feel blessed to have been in your presence. I really, really do. And I love what you're doing and who you are. So thank you so much, Shakti. And thank you to everybody for listening as well. So that's it. So thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Bye.